The sound of iron shackles clanking against wooden floorboards silenced the raucous crowd as Cassidy James stumbled onto the auction platform. Her once fine blue dress, now soiled with dust and tears from 3 days of rough travel, hung limply around her slender frame. The July heat of 1876 in Redemption Creek, Colorado Territory, was merciless, causing sweat to bead on her forehead despite the evening hour. "Next up, gentlemen," bellowed the auctioneer, a stout man with yellowed teeth and a greedy glint in his eyes. A fine specimen of womanhood. Young, healthy, and educated too. Reads and writes better than half you lot. Starting bid at $50, Cassidy's green eyes, though bloodshot from crying, blazed with defiance. This wasn't supposed to be her fate. Just 1 month ago, she had been a schoolteacher in Boston, heading west to take a position in Denver. Then came the stagecoach robbery, the murdered driver, and her rescue by men who turned out to be worse than the bandits. Laughter and crude comments erupted from the crowd of cowboys, miners, and townsmen who had gathered for the illegal human auction. Cassidy's stomach turned at the leering faces. In the shadows of the establishment, she noticed a tall figure standing apart from the others, his face obscured by the brim of a worn leather hat. $50, called a red-faced miner, spitting tobacco juice onto the floor. 60, countered another. The bidding continued, each increase causing Cassidy's heart to race faster. She was property now to be bought and used according to some stranger's whims. Her parents were both gone, her brother somewhere fighting Indians with the cavalry. There was no one to save her. 100. Shouted a portly businessman with greedy eyes. 150, called a grizzled rancher. The figure in the shadows suddenly stepped forward and the crowd parted. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. A leather vest covered his cotton shirt, and a 6-shooter hung at his hip. $300, he said, his voice quiet yet carrying across the now silent room. The auctioneer's eyes widened. 300 from Mr. Dawson Vaughn. Do I hear 350? The businessman started to raise his hand but faltered under Dawson's steady gaze. 300 going once, twice. The auctioneer's gavel hovered in the air. 500, called a voice from the back. A well-dressed man with cold eyes stepped forward. Cassidy recognized him immediately. William Tanner, the man who had arranged her kidnapping after she had rejected his advances in the stagecoach station. Dawson Vaughn's jaw tightened. He reached into his vest and pulled out a leather pouch, emptying its contents onto a nearby table. Gold coins, paper money, and what looked like a deed tumbled out. "Everything I have," he said firmly. $782, plus the deed to my silver claim in the hills, worth at least another 1,000. A murmur rippled through the crowd. No woman had ever fetched such a price at these illicit auctions. Tanner's face reddened. "You can't—" "I believe I just did," Dawson interrupted, his hand resting casually near his holster. The auctioneer, seeing a chance for profit and an end to potential violence, quickly brought down his gavel. "Sold. To Dawson Vaughn for $782 and a silver claim." 2 men roughly pushed Cassidy toward Dawson. As she stumbled forward, he stepped onto the platform and caught her arm to steady her. The touch was firm but not brutal like the hands that had dragged her here. "She's mine," he said, his voice carrying just enough threat to silence any protest from Tanner or the others. "The paperwork, if you please." The auctioneer hurriedly produced a bill of sale, which Dawson signed without releasing his hold on Cassidy's arm. When the transaction was complete, he led her through the crowd, which parted before them. Outside, the evening air felt cool compared to the stifling auction house. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky as Dawson guided her to a hitching post where a magnificent chestnut stallion waited. "Can you ride?" he asked, his first words directly to her. "Yes," Cassidy replied, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Good. We've got a ways to go before we're safe." He unlocked her shackles with a key he must have received from the auctioneer, then helped her onto the horse before mounting behind her. They rode out of town at a steady pace, neither speaking until the lights of Redemption Creek had faded behind them. After an hour of riding, Cassidy finally found her voice. "Why did you buy me?" Dawson was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "No woman deserves that fate." "And what fate awaits me with you?" she asked bitterly. His arms, which encircled her as he held the reins, neither tightened nor moved inappropriately. "Safety, Miss James. Then your freedom when we're far enough away that Tanner can't find you." Cassidy twisted in the saddle to look at him, searching his face for deceit in the moonlight. All she found was weariness and something that might have been compassion. "You spent everything you had," she said quietly. "Money can be earned again. A person's dignity, once taken, is harder to restore." They rode in silence for another hour before reaching a small cabin nestled among pine trees. A creek burbled nearby, and the scent of wildflowers hung in the night air. "My hunting cabin," Dawson explained as he dismounted and helped her down. "We'll stay here tonight, then head to my ranch tomorrow. It's another day's ride west." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall while a narrow bed occupied another. A table with 2 chairs sat in the center, and shelves held provisions and cooking utensils. "You take the bed," Dawson said, lighting a lantern. "I'll sleep by the fire." Cassidy stood awkwardly in the center of the room, uncertain. This man had spent his life savings to purchase her, yet he was offering her the only bed and making no advances. "I don't understand," she admitted. "If freedom was your goal, why not just help me escape? Why pay so much?" Dawson sighed as he set his hat on a hook by the door. In the lantern light, she could see that his hair was dark brown with traces of gray at the temples, and his eyes were a clear blue that reminded her of summer skies. "Tanner has men everywhere in that town. If you'd simply disappeared, they would have hunted you down." He removed his gun belt and hung it beside his hat. "This way, I legally own you, which means Tanner has no claim, and once we're at my ranch, I'll sign papers releasing you." "You own a ranch?" she asked, trying to reconcile this information with the fact that he had just spent everything he owned to buy her freedom. "Vaughn Valley. 2,000 acres, 300 head of cattle, and a decent house. I started with nothing 10 years ago. And you'd risk it all for a stranger." Dawson began preparing a simple meal of beans and bacon on the small stove. "My sister was taken by slavers when I was 14. Our family had come west, hoping for a better life. Instead, we found hardship and cruelty." His voice remained steady, but Cassidy could hear the old pain beneath the words. "By the time I tracked her down 3 years later, it was too late. I couldn't save her." Cassidy's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. But I made a promise that I'd never stand by while an innocent was sold into slavery, no matter the cost." He gestured to a basin in the corner. "There's water if you want to wash up. Food will be ready soon." Grateful for the chance to remove the grime of captivity, Cassidy used the cold water and a piece of soap to clean her face and hands. She did her best to tidy her long auburn hair, wishing for a brush. When she returned to the table, Dawson had set out 2 plates of food and cups of coffee. He waited for her to sit before taking his own seat. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for what he had done. He nodded and began to eat. After a few bites, he asked, "What brought you west, Miss James?" The sound of her name, spoken with respect rather than as a commodity, nearly undid her composure. I was to be the schoolteacher in Denver. I've taught in Boston for the past 3 years, but when I saw the advertisement for teachers in the Western Territories, I thought it would be an adventure. Some adventure, Dawson remarked dryly. Despite everything, Cassidy found herself smiling slightly. Indeed, not quite what I had imagined when I boarded the train east. What will you do now? Still go to Denver? She considered this. I'm not sure. The position may have been filled by now, and she hesitated. I find myself without funds or possessions. You'll have money when I release you, Dawson assured her. Enough to get you wherever you want to go. Cassidy stared at him. You've already given everything you had. Not everything. The ranch is still mine, and there's money in the safe at home. Not as much as I gave today, but enough to see you safely on your way. She shook her head in disbelief. Mr. Vaughn, I don't know how I can ever repay such kindness. Live well, he said simply. That's repayment enough. After the meal, exhaustion overtook her, and despite her wariness, Cassidy found herself drifting to sleep almost as soon as she lay down on the bed. The last thing she remembered was seeing Dawson spread his bedroll before the dying fire, his gun within easy reach as he settled in for the night. She awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For a moment, Cassidy thought she was back in her Boston boarding house, but then memory returned with crushing force. Dawson was already dressed and cooking breakfast. He looked up as she stirred. Good morning. Hope you slept well. Better than I expected, she admitted, sitting up and trying to smooth her wrinkled dress. What time is it? Just past 7. We should get moving soon. It's a long ride to the ranch. After a breakfast of bacon, biscuits, and strong coffee, they set out. The day was clear and beautiful, with a sky so intensely blue, it almost hurt to look at it. The pine-covered hills gave way to more open country as they rode west, and Cassidy found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait and the solid presence of Dawson behind her. Have you lived in the West long? She asked after they had ridden in companionable silence for several miles. Since I was 12. My family came from Virginia after the war. My father fought for the Confederacy and lost everything. Dawson's voice held no bitterness, just a matter of fact acceptance. He died 2 years after we arrived, leaving me to look after my mother and sister. I failed at that. You were a child, Cassidy pointed out. No one could expect you to protect them. I expected it of myself, he replied simply. What about you? Have you always lived in Boston? Yes. My father was a professor at Harvard and my mother taught piano. They wanted me to marry well, but I was more interested in books and teaching than finding a husband. She smiled sadly. They both died of influenza 3 years ago. My brother joined the army shortly after and I was alone. That's partly why I decided to come west. There was nothing holding me in Boston anymore. And now? Dawson asked. Cassidy considered the question. Now I'm not sure what awaits me. But I'm alive and free, thanks to you. That's more than I dared hope for yesterday. They stopped at midday to rest the horse and eat a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack by a small stream. Cassidy removed her shoes and cooled her feet in the water while Dawson checked his horse's hooves and saddle. How much farther to your ranch? She asked, watching a dragonfly skim across the water's surface. We should arrive by sunset if we keep a steady pace. Cassidy nodded, trying not to think about what would happen when they reached their destination. Dawson had promised her freedom and money to continue her journey, but the thought of parting ways with this quiet, honorable man left her with an unexpected sense of loss. As they prepared to continue their journey, a distant plume of dust caught Dawson's attention. His expression hardened as he quickly helped Cassidy back onto the horse. "Riders," he explained tersely. "Could be nothing, but I don't want to take chances." They set off at a faster pace, keeping to the shelter of trees when possible. The dust cloud grew larger, and soon Cassidy could make out 4 horsemen following their trail. "Tanner's men?" she asked, fear tightening her throat. "Probably. He's not the type to give up easily, especially when his pride is wounded." Dawson pushed the horse harder, but the riders behind them were gaining. When they reached a rocky outcropping, he suddenly pulled off the trail and dismounted. "We need to make a stand," he said, helping her down. "Get behind those rocks. If anything happens to me, take the horse and keep heading west. My ranch is about 15 miles further on. You'll see the sign for Vaughn Valley. My foreman, Frank Miller, will help you." "I can't leave you," Cassidy protested. "You can and you will," Dawson replied firmly, checking his revolver. "I didn't spend everything I had just to see you back in Tanner's hands." Before she could argue further, the sound of approaching hooves grew louder. Dawson positioned himself behind a boulder, his gun ready. The 4 riders came into view, slowing as they spotted Dawson's horse. Cassidy recognized Tanner immediately, his fancy suit and hat making him stand out among his rougher companions. "Vaughn," Tanner called. "We know you're here. Come out and bring the woman with you." "The woman is my legal property, Tanner," Dawson replied, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. "I have the bill of sale. You lost the auction fair and square." Tanner laughed, an ugly sound. "That auction was anything but legal, as you well know. Hand her over and I'll let you live." "Not going to happen. Turn around and ride back to town." One of Tanner's men shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. Dawson fired a warning shot that kicked up dust inches from the man's horse. "Next one won't miss," Dawson warned. "I've got the high ground and plenty of ammunition." "How many of you want to die today?" The standoff stretched for several tense moments. Then Tanner raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Very well, Vaughn. Keep the woman for now, but this isn't over." He turned his horse. "Come on, boys, we'll settle this another time." The men rode away, but Cassidy didn't relax until they had disappeared from sight. Dawson remained vigilant for several more minutes before finally lowering his gun. "They gave up too easily," he said, frowning. "Tanner's planning something. What do we do now?" Cassidy asked, emerging from her hiding place. "Change course. We'll head north for a while, then circle back toward the ranch. It'll add a few hours to our journey, but it might throw them off our trail." They rode hard for the rest of the afternoon, taking a winding path through increasingly rugged terrain. Cassidy's body ached from the long hours in the saddle, but she didn't complain. As dusk approached, they crested a hill and the landscape opened before them. "Vaughn Valley," Dawson said, a note of pride in his voice. Below them stretched a lush valley, bisected by a silver ribbon of river. Cattle dotted the grasslands, and in the distance, Cassidy could make out buildings clustered around what must be the main house. It was beautiful, bathed in the golden light of sunset. "It's wonderful," she breathed. "It's home," he replied simply. "Come on. We'll be there before full dark." As they approached the ranch, dogs began barking and lanterns appeared as people came out to investigate. A stocky man with a gray beard stepped forward as they rode into the yard. "Boss, we weren't expecting you back so soon." His eyes widened as he spotted Cassidy. "And with company." "Frank," Dawson acknowledged his foreman. "This is Miss Cassidy James. She'll be staying with us for a while." Frank's eyebrows rose, but he asked no questions. "I'll have Mrs. Cooper prepare a room." "Thank you." Dawson dismounted and helped Cassidy down. Her legs nearly buckled after the long ride, and he steadied her with a hand at her elbow. "Let's get you inside." The main house was larger than Cassidy had expected. built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Inside, it was comfortably furnished with a mix of handcrafted pieces and items that must have been brought from the East at considerable expense. Mrs. Cooper, the housekeeper, was a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands. She took one look at Cassidy and immediately began fussing. "Land's sakes, child, you look exhausted. Come along, I'll show you to your room and draw a bath. You'll feel better after you're clean and have had a proper meal." Cassidy was too tired to do anything but follow, casting a grateful glance at Dawson before Mrs. Cooper whisked her upstairs. The promised bath was heavenly. Cassidy soaked in the hot water, washing away the grime and fear of the past days. Mrs. Cooper had provided a nightgown and robe, along with a promise to find suitable clothing for the morning. After her bath, Cassidy found a tray of food waiting in her room: tender beef, fluffy potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie still warm from the oven. She ate ravenously, realizing she hadn't had a proper meal in days. A soft knock at her door came just as she was finishing. "Come in," she called, pulling the robe more securely around herself. Dawson entered, looking somewhat uncomfortable. He had changed into clean clothes and washed up, making him appear less trail-worn but no less imposing. "I wanted to make sure you have everything you need," he said, remaining near the door. "Yes, thank you. Mrs. Cooper has been very kind," he nodded. "She's a good woman. Her husband was my first ranch hand when I started here. He passed 2 years ago, but she stayed on to run the house." An awkward silence fell between them. Cassidy searched for something to say, feeling strangely shy now that they were in his home rather than on the trail. "Your ranch is beautiful," she offered finally. "You've built something remarkable here." A small smile touched his lips. "It's been a lot of work, but worth it." He hesitated, then added, "In the morning we'll discuss your plans. I meant what I said about helping you get wherever you want to go." "Thank you," Cassidy said softly, "for everything." He inclined his head. "Get some rest, Miss James. You're safe here." After he left, Cassidy climbed into the large, comfortable bed. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she contemplated her situation. She was free, or would be once Dawson signed the papers releasing her. But where would she go? Denver might still need a teacher, but the thought of traveling alone again after her recent experience filled her with dread. And then there was Dawson himself. A man who had spent his life savings to rescue a stranger, who had treated her with nothing but respect and kindness. A man whose quiet strength and unwavering principles had saved her from a fate worse than death. How could she simply thank him and walk away? With these thoughts tumbling through her mind, Cassidy finally drifted into sleep, lulled by the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night: the distant lowing of cattle, the hoot of an owl, and the soft whisper of wind through the pines. The next morning, Cassidy awoke to sunshine streaming through curtains she hadn't had the energy to close the night before. For a moment, she lay still, savoring the comfort of the bed and the knowledge that she was safe. A knock at the door roused her fully. Mrs. Cooper entered with a bundle of clothing in her arms. "Good morning, Miss James. I've brought some things that might fit you. They belong to Mr. Vaughn's sister-in-law. She and her husband visit occasionally from Denver and leave some belongings here." "Thank you," Cassidy said, sitting up. "You're very kind." "Nonsense. Just doing my job." Mrs. Cooper set the clothes on a chair. "Breakfast will be ready when you come down. Mr. Vaughn is already up and seeing to ranch business, but he asked to speak with you when you're ready. He'll be in his study." After Mrs. Cooper left, Cassidy examined the clothing. There were 2 simple day dresses, undergarments, stockings, and even a pair of boots that looked close to her size. She chose the blue dress, which needed only minor adjustments to fit her slender frame adequately. Downstairs, the kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of coffee and freshly baked bread. Mrs. Cooper served Cassidy a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits with honey. "Mr. Vaughn didn't tell me much about you," the housekeeper said conversationally as she worked at the stove. "Just that you needed help and would be staying with us for a time. He rescued me," Cassidy said simply. "I was in a terrible situation, and he intervened at great personal cost." Mrs. Cooper nodded as if this explained everything. "That sounds like him. The boss has a soft spot for those in need, though he'd never admit it." She smiled warmly. "Finish your breakfast, dear. Mr. Vaughn's study is down the hall, last door on the right." When Cassidy had eaten her fill, she followed Mrs. Cooper's directions and found herself before a heavy wooden door. She knocked softly. "Come in," Dawson called. The study was a masculine space, with bookshelves lining one wall, a large desk dominating the center, and a fireplace flanked by comfortable leather chairs. Maps and cattle tallies were spread across the desk, and a gun rack held several rifles on the far wall. Dawson rose when she entered, setting aside the ledger he had been reviewing. "Good morning, Miss James. I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you. And please call me Cassidy." He gestured to one of the chairs by the fireplace. "Then you must call me Dawson. Would you like coffee?" When she nodded, he poured 2 cups from a pot warming on the hearth and handed one to her before taking the opposite chair. "I've been thinking about your situation," he began. "I've drawn up papers releasing you from any obligation to me." He indicated a document on a small table between them. "Once you sign, you'll legally be a free woman again." Cassidy picked up the paper, reading the formal language that declared her no longer bound by the bill of sale from the auction house. At the bottom was a space for both their signatures. "And after I sign this," she asked, looking up at him. "That depends on what you want to do. If Denver is still your destination, I can provide funds and an escort to ensure you arrive safely. Or if you prefer to return east, that can be arranged as well." Cassidy set the paper down. "You've already done so much, I can't ask for more." "You're not asking, I'm offering." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "What happened to you was unconscionable. The least I can do is see you safely to your destination." She took a sip of coffee, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "To be honest, I'm not sure what I want to do now. The teaching position in Denver may be filled, and after what happened." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "I need to find work, somewhere I can use my skills." Dawson was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "There's a need for a teacher here in the valley. Many of the ranch hands have families, and the nearest school is 20 miles away. I've been thinking of building a schoolhouse, but without a teacher it seemed pointless." Cassidy's heart quickened. "Are you offering me a position, if you're interested?" "The pay wouldn't be as much as Denver would offer, but you'd have room and board here at the main house, and the respect of the community." He hesitated. "It would be temporary, of course, until you decide what you truly want to do." "I would need to think about it," she said, though in truth, the idea appealed to her immediately. The ranch was beautiful, the work meaningful, and she would be far from William Tanner's reach. Of course. "Take all the time you need." Dawson stood. "In the meantime, would you like a tour of the ranch? It might help you decide." The day was clear and pleasant as they set out on horseback, Cassidy now riding her own mount, a gentle mare named Daisy. Dawson showed her the extent of his property. From the lush pastures, where cattle grazed, to the pine forests that provided lumber for ranch buildings. They visited the bunkhouse where the single ranch hands lived, the small cabins that housed families, and the barn where a blacksmith was shoeing horses. Everywhere they went, people greeted Dawson with respect and obvious affection. He knew each person by name, inquired after family members, and listened attentively to reports and concerns. Cassidy watched him with growing admiration, seeing how he had earned the loyalty of his workers through fair treatment and genuine interest in their welfare. "How many people live on the ranch?" she asked as they rode back toward the main house. "About 30 adults and 15 children of various ages," he replied. "Most of the men who work for me have been here for years. I believe in building a community, not just running a business." "That's admirable," Cassidy said sincerely. "Most employers I've known view workers as little more than tools to be used." Dawson's expression darkened slightly. "I've seen that approach. It leads to resentment and poor work. My men know that if they give me their best, I'll stand by them when times are hard." They reached a small rise overlooking a meadow filled with wildflowers. Dawson reined in his horse and dismounted, helping Cassidy down as well. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, taking in the beauty of the landscape. "This is where I'd build the schoolhouse," Dawson said finally, gesturing to a level area near a stream. "Close enough to the main buildings for safety, but with its own space. Room for a garden, too, where the children could learn about growing things." Cassidy could picture it, a simple but sturdy building with large windows to let in light, desks for the students, a small library of books. Children playing in the meadow during breaks, learning their letters and numbers inside. "It would be wonderful," she said softly. "It could be," he agreed, watching her face, "if there were a teacher willing to take on the challenge." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding, of shared vision. Cassidy looked away first, her cheeks warming. "I'd like to speak with some of the families," she said, "to understand their expectations for their children's education." Dawson's smile was brief but genuine. "I'll arrange it for tomorrow. For now, we should head back. Mrs. Cooper will have dinner waiting." That evening, after a satisfying meal shared with Frank Miller and Mrs. Cooper, Cassidy found herself sitting on the porch with Dawson, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. The air was cool but not cold, fragrant with pine and the sweet scent of grass. "I never saw stars like this in Boston," she remarked. The city lights and smoke obscured all but the brightest. "That's one thing I love about the West," Dawson replied. "The sky seems bigger somehow, more alive." "It's beautiful," she agreed. After a moment of hesitation, she added, "I've been thinking about your offer." He turned to look at her, his expression carefully neutral. "And? I'd like to accept, at least temporarily. The children here deserve an education, and she took a deep breath. "I'm not ready to leave yet. This place already feels safer than anywhere I've been since leaving Boston." "I'm glad to hear it," Dawson said, and she could hear the genuine pleasure in his voice. "We'll draw up terms tomorrow, make it official." "Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer. Finally, Cassidy gathered her courage to ask a question that had been on her mind. "You mentioned your sister yesterday, but you also spoke of a sister-in-law. Do you have a brother?" Dawson nodded. "Daniel. He's 3 years younger than me, lives in Denver with his wife, Elizabeth. He's a lawyer doing well for himself." "And your mother passed away 5 years ago." "Consumption." His voice held old grief, well controlled. "She lived long enough to see the ranch become successful, at least." "I'm sorry for your loss," Cassidy said softly. "It seems you've known more than your share of hardship." Dawson shrugged slightly. "Everyone out here has a story. The West doesn't attract people who have had easy lives." "What's your story, then?" she asked. "Beyond what you've already told me." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, reflective. "I came west with nothing but determination and a promise to my father that I'd make something of myself. Worked cattle drives, broke horses, took any job that paid, saved every penny until I could buy a small herd and a piece of land. He gestured toward the valley spread before them. Started with 50 acres and 30 head of cattle, built it up year by year. Alone, a shadow crossed his face. Not always. I was married once briefly. Her name was Rebecca. She came west with her brother looking for adventure. We met at a dance in town, courted for 6 months, married the next spring. He paused. She wasn't prepared for ranch life. The isolation, the hard work, the dangers. After 2 years, she left with a cattle buyer passing through. I got a letter from St. Louis a month later asking for a divorce. "I'm sorry," Cassidy said, meaning it. She could see the old hurt in his eyes, carefully buried but still present. It was a long time ago, 12 years this August. He looked out at the stars again. "I don't blame her. This life isn't for everyone. Yet you've made it your home. It suits me." He turned to her with a small smile. "What about you? You mentioned your parents and brother, but was there never a young man in Boston who caught your eye?" Cassidy laughed softly. "There were suitors, certainly. My parents made sure of that. But none who interested me more than my books and teaching. The young men of Boston society expected a wife who would host dinner parties and raise children, not one who wanted to discuss literature and politics." "Their loss," Dawson commented. The simple statement, delivered without flattery or expectation, warmed Cassidy more than any elaborate compliment ever had. The next day brought a flurry of activity. Dawson sent word to the families on the ranch that a teacher had arrived, and by mid-morning, Cassidy found herself meeting with mothers eager to discuss their children's education. "My Jacob is smart with numbers," said Mrs. Whitaker, wife of the ranch blacksmith. "Helps his pa figure costs for jobs, but his reading needs work." "My girls want to learn everything," declared Mrs. Rodriguez, whose husband managed the cattle herd. "Especially Emma. She reads any scrap of paper she can find." By lunchtime, Cassidy had met with 6 families and made notes about the 15 children who would form her first class. Their ages ranged from 6 to 16, their educational backgrounds varied widely, and their enthusiasm was infectious. "You've made quite an impression," Dawson remarked as they shared a simple lunch of sandwiches and lemonade in his study. "Mrs. Cooper says the mothers are already planning how to help build the schoolhouse." "They're wonderful people," Cassidy said earnestly, "and the children so eager to learn. The Whitaker boys have been teaching themselves from an old mathematics primer, and Emma Rodriguez has read your entire collection of Dickens novels." "Borrowed without permission, I suspect," Dawson said with a chuckle. "She's a determined little thing. She reminds me of myself at that age." Cassidy smiled, then grew more serious. "I've been thinking about what we'll need for the school. Books, slates, paper, maps." "Make a list," Dawson said. "I'll send to Denver for supplies. In the meantime, we can start building the schoolhouse. Frank says we have enough lumber cut and seasoned to begin immediately." "So soon?" Cassidy was surprised. "No sense in delay. The children have already waited too long for proper schooling." He hesitated, then added, "And I want you to have a reason to stay." The simple admission hung in the air between them. Cassidy felt her cheeks warm as she met his steady gaze. "I've already decided to stay," she said softly. "At least until I know the school is well established." Before he could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Voices were raised in alarm, and the sound of galloping hooves approached the house. Dawson was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "Riders coming in fast. Something's wrong." He strode from the study, Cassidy following close behind. They reached the porch just as a ranch hand pulled his lathered horse to a stop in the yard. "Mr. Vaughn," the man called, his voice urgent. "Rustlers hit the north pasture. They've taken at least 50 head and shot Jim Parker when he tried to stop them. How bad is Jim hurt? Dawson demanded. Shoulder wound. Doc's with him now. But the rustlers are heading north with our cattle. Dawson's expression hardened. Frank, he called, and the foreman appeared from the direction of the barn. Get 6 men together. Rifles, ammunition, 3 days' provisions. We're going after them. As the ranch sprang into action, Dawson turned to Cassidy. Stay here. Mrs. Cooper will look after you. We should be back in a few days. Be careful, she said, suddenly afraid for him. These men sound dangerous. I've dealt with rustlers before. His hand briefly touched her arm in reassurance. This is part of ranch life, I'm afraid. Within 30 minutes, Dawson and his men were mounted and ready to ride. As they prepared to leave, he sought out Cassidy one last time. If I'm not back in 5 days, Frank's wife knows where I keep my legal papers. There's money in the safe for you and letters for my brother and others. His blue eyes held hers intently. Just in case. Don't talk like that, Cassidy protested. You'll be back. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Yes, madam. Then he was mounting his horse and giving the signal to move out. Cassidy watched until the dust cloud raised by the riders disappeared over the northern ridge. Only then did she allow Mrs. Cooper to lead her back inside. Don't you worry about the boss, the housekeeper said firmly. He's faced worse than a few cattle thieves and come through just fine. Despite Mrs. Cooper's reassurances, the next 3 days were among the longest of Cassidy's life. To keep herself occupied, she began organizing lessons for her future students, using books from Dawson's library. She also spent time with the ranch women, learning more about their lives and their children. On the 4th day, as Cassidy was helping Mrs. Cooper preserve peaches from the small orchard behind the house, a ranch hand burst into the kitchen. Riders coming. It's the boss and the others. Cassidy dropped her apron and hurried outside, her heart pounding. 7 riders approached, leading a herd of cattle. As they drew closer, she searched anxiously for Dawson, finally spotting him at the head of the group. Relief flooded through her at the sight of him, apparently unharmed. The men drove the cattle into a holding pen, then dismounted in the yard. They looked exhausted but triumphant. Dawson handed his reins to a waiting stable boy and walked toward the house, removing his hat as he approached Cassidy. You're back, she said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. As promised. His face was sun-burned and stubbled with several days' growth of beard, but his eyes were clear and focused on her. We recovered all the cattle and captured 3 of the rustlers. They're tied up in the back of the wagon, heading for the sheriff in town. Were any of your men hurt? Minor injuries only, a few cuts and bruises. He looked beyond her to Mrs. Cooper. Is there hot water for washing up and food? The men are hungry. Of course, Mr. Vaughn, the housekeeper replied. Everything's ready. Later, after Dawson had bathed and changed into clean clothes, he joined Cassidy on the porch. The evening was peaceful, with the soft sounds of the ranch settling down for the night surrounding them. While I was gone, I had time to think, Dawson said after they had sat in comfortable silence for a while, about the school and other things. What other things? Cassidy asked, curious about his thoughtful tone. He turned to face her directly. About you, about me. About what might be possible between us. Cassidy's heart began to race. What do you mean? I mean that in the short time you've been here, you've become important to me. His voice was steady, but she could sense the effort it took him to speak so openly. I know it's too soon to speak of feelings. You've been through a terrible ordeal and you're still finding your footing. But I want you to know that I hope you'll consider staying, not just as the teacher, but because you might one day see this place and me as home. Cassidy was speechless for a moment, overwhelmed by his quiet declaration. Dawson, don't answer now, he interrupted gently. Just think about it. I'm a patient man. Before she could respond, hoofbeats sounded on the road leading to the ranch. Dawson was immediately alert, his hand moving to the gun he wore even here at home. A single rider approached, silhouetted against the sunset. As he drew closer, Cassidy could make out a man in a dark suit, riding a fine-looking bay horse. "It's Daniel," Dawson said, relaxing slightly. "My brother. I wasn't expecting him for another month." The rider dismounted smoothly and strode toward the house. The family resemblance was clear, though Daniel Vaughn was slighter in build than his brother and more formally dressed. His expression was grave as he climbed the porch steps. "Dawson," he greeted, "we need to talk." "What's wrong?" Dawson asked, immediately sensing his brother's tension. Daniel's eyes flicked to Cassidy, then back to Dawson. "Privately, if possible. Miss James is a trusted friend," Dawson said firmly. "Whatever you have to say can be said in front of her." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. I've just come from Redemption Creek. William Tanner is pressing charges against you for theft of property and kidnapping." "What?" Cassidy gasped. "He claims you stole Miss James from him after an illegal transaction, and that you've been holding her against her will." Daniel's expression was grim. "He's convinced the local judge to issue a warrant for your arrest. The sheriff and a posse are on their way here now." Dawson's face hardened. "That's ridiculous. The bill of sale is legal, even if the auction itself wasn't, and Miss James is here of her own free will. I tried to explain that, but Tanner has influence in that town. The sheriff is his cousin, and the judge owes him money." Daniel ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I rode ahead to warn you. They're about 2 hours behind me." "What can we do?" Cassidy asked, fear rising within her. Daniel turned to her. "You could testify that you're here willingly, but Tanner will claim you're speaking under duress. What we need is proof that Tanner arranged your kidnapping in the first place." "And how do we get that?" Dawson demanded. "I'm not sure yet." Daniel paced the porch. "If we had a witness, someone who could testify to Tanner's involvement." "One of the men who took me might talk," Cassidy suggested. "They weren't loyal to Tanner, just paid to do a job." Dawson nodded thoughtfully. "The auction house owner might also have information. He seemed to know Tanner well." "I can ride back to Redemption Creek," Daniel offered. "Try to find someone willing to testify against Tanner." "It's too dangerous," Dawson objected. "If Tanner realizes what you're doing, he could have you arrested too, or worse." Daniel smiled grimly. "I'm a lawyer, remember. I know how to be discreet. And I have friends in the territorial capital who can intervene if necessary." After further discussion, a plan was formed. Daniel would return to Redemption Creek to gather evidence against Tanner, while Dawson would delay the sheriff and his posse when they arrived at the ranch. "What about me?" Cassidy asked. "Should I hide?" Dawson shook his head. "No, you need to be seen, acting freely and clearly, not a prisoner. The ranch hands and their families will support us. They can testify that you've been teaching their children and moving about the property without constraint." As Daniel prepared to leave, he pulled Dawson aside for a private word. Cassidy couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Dawson's face grow serious, then resolute. He clasped his brother's shoulder before Daniel mounted his horse and rode back the way he had come. "What did he say to you?" Cassidy asked when Dawson returned to her side. "He reminded me that Tanner is a dangerous man who won't stop until he gets what he wants." Dawson's eyes held a steely determination. "But neither will I." The next 2 hours passed in tense preparation. Dawson informed the ranch hands of the situation, and they positioned themselves strategically around the property, armed but instructed not to provoke violence. Mrs. Cooper prepared coffee and food, commenting dryly that Even lawmen appreciate hospitality. As dusk deepened into night, the sound of multiple horses approaching broke the silence. Dawson, who had been watching from an upstairs window, came down to the porch where Cassidy waited. "They're here," he said quietly. 7 men, including the sheriff. "Stay calm and let me do the talking at first." The riders entered the yard, lantern light glinting off the badges worn by 2 of them. A heavy-set man with a drooping mustache dismounted first, his hand resting near his holstered gun. "Dawson Vaughn," he called. "That's me," Dawson replied, stepping forward. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of theft and kidnapping." The sheriff pulled a paper from his vest pocket. "You're to come with us to Redemption Creek to stand trial." "That's a serious accusation," Dawson said evenly. "May I see the warrant?" The sheriff hesitated, then approached and handed over the document. Dawson read it carefully before speaking again. "This warrant claims I kidnapped and am holding against her a woman named Cassidy James." He gestured to Cassidy. "As you can see, Miss James is here of her own free will. She's been hired as the teacher for our ranch school." The sheriff looked at Cassidy suspiciously. "Is that true, madam? Are you here willingly?" "Absolutely," Cassidy stated firmly. "Mr. Vaughn rescued me from an illegal auction where I was being sold against my will. He has treated me with nothing but respect and kindness." One of the posse members, a thin man with nervous eyes, spoke up. "Tanner said she'd say that. Said Vaughn has her under his control." "That's ridiculous," Cassidy retorted. "I'm a free woman making my own choices. The children here need education and I'm a qualified teacher. I've agreed to stay and establish a school." The sheriff looked uncertain. "Well, that may be, but Mr. Tanner has sworn a statement that you were his property legally purchased and that Vaughn stole you away." "No human being can be another's property," Dawson said firmly. "The auction itself was illegal, a fact Tanner well knows. Furthermore, I have reason to believe he arranged Miss James's kidnapping in the first place." This caused a stir among the posse members. The sheriff frowned deeply. "That's a serious accusation, Vaughn. Do you have proof?" "My brother is gathering evidence as we speak. He's a lawyer in Denver and knows the territorial laws well." Dawson's voice was calm but authoritative. "I suggest you return to town and wait for his findings before attempting to arrest an innocent man based on the word of William Tanner." The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with the sheriff clearly torn between his duty to execute the warrant and his growing doubts about its validity. Finally, one of the other men in the posse, an older rancher with a weathered face, spoke up. "Jim, I've known Dawson Vaughn for 10 years, never known him to lie or break the law. If he says this woman is here by choice, I believe him. And if he says Tanner is behind something crooked, that I believe too." Several others murmured agreement, causing the sheriff to look increasingly uncomfortable. "Look," Dawson said reasonably, "it's late and you men have ridden a long way. Why not accept our hospitality for the night? My housekeeper has prepared food and coffee and we have room in the bunkhouse. In the morning, we can discuss this further, perhaps after my brother returns with the evidence he's gathering." The sheriff hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, Vaughn, one night, but I'll be keeping an eye on you and the lady." As the posse members dismounted and were led toward the bunkhouse by Frank, Cassidy moved closer to Dawson. "Will this work?" she whispered. "It buys us time," he replied quietly. "Let's hope Daniel finds what we need." The night passed with an uneasy truce. The sheriff insisted on staying in the main house, ostensibly to protect Cassidy, though both she and Dawson knew he was really there to prevent any attempt to flee. They accommodated him with a guest room, while the rest of the posse bedded down in the bunkhouse under the watchful eyes of Dawson's loyal ranch hands. Morning brought no sign of Daniel, and the sheriff's patience was wearing thin. By noon, he was insisting they prepare to leave for Redemption Creek. "I've been more than fair, Vaughn," he said as they stood in the yard, "but I have a job to do." "Just a little longer, Sheriff," Dawson urged. "My brother," the sound of approaching riders interrupted him. Everyone turned to see a group of horsemen coming fast toward the ranch. As they drew closer, Cassidy recognized Daniel at the front, accompanied by several men she didn't know. "That's Judge Wilson from the territorial court," the sheriff said, sounding surprised. "What's he doing here?" Daniel and his companions rode into the yard and dismounted. The judge, a dignified man with silver hair and piercing eyes, stepped forward. "Sheriff Jenkins," he greeted formally. "I understand you're here to execute a warrant issued by Judge Taylor in Redemption Creek." "Yes, Your Honor," the sheriff replied, suddenly looking much less certain of himself. "That warrant has been suspended pending investigation of serious allegations against William Tanner." The judge handed over an official-looking document. "I have here affidavits from 3 men admitting they were paid by Tanner to kidnap Miss James from her stagecoach and deliver her to the auction house." A murmur ran through the assembled men. The sheriff read the document, his face growing increasingly troubled. "Furthermore," Daniel added, "the auction house owner has provided a written statement confirming that Tanner arranged the entire affair after Miss James rejected his advances in Denver." The judge turned to Cassidy. "Miss James, these men's descriptions of you and the circumstances of your abduction are quite detailed. Can you confirm that these are the men who took you?" Daniel held out a paper with 3 sketches. Cassidy examined them carefully, then nodded firmly. "Yes, Your Honor. These are the men who attacked our stagecoach and took me captive. And Mr. Vaughn purchased you at this illegal auction." "He did, but only to save me from a worse fate. He immediately told me I was free and has treated me with nothing but respect." Cassidy lifted her chin. "I am here of my own free will, working as a teacher for the children of this ranch." The judge nodded, satisfied. "Sheriff, you will return to Redemption Creek and inform Judge Taylor of these developments. William Tanner is to be arrested on charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and perjury. The territorial marshal is already on his way to assist." The sheriff, looking both relieved and embarrassed, nodded quickly. "Yes, Your Honor, right away." Within the hour, the sheriff and his posse were riding back to town, considerably subdued. The judge and his companions accepted Dawson's invitation to stay for a meal, before continuing to Redemption Creek, where they would oversee Tanner's arrest and the legal proceedings that would follow. As the tension of the past day finally eased, Cassidy found herself standing with Dawson on the porch, watching as Daniel chatted amicably with the judge and the other men. "Your brother is quite remarkable," she observed, "to accomplish all this in just one night." "Daniel has always been the clever one," Dawson agreed with a fond smile. "He knows how to work within the law to achieve justice. I tend to take a more direct approach." "Like spending everything you own to buy a woman from an auction block?" Cassidy asked, her voice gentle. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." His blue eyes met hers, serious and sincere. "Why?" she asked softly. "You said it was because of your sister, but—" "That was part of it," he acknowledged. "But from the moment I saw you standing there, so afraid yet still defiant, something in me couldn't bear to see your spirit broken." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I think I began falling in love with you even then, though I didn't recognize it at the time." Cassidy's breath caught. "Dawson." "I know it's too soon," he said quickly. You've only known me a short while and you're still recovering from a terrible ordeal. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know the truth of why I did what I did." Cassidy reached out tentatively and placed her hand on his arm. "It's not too soon to acknowledge that there's something between us, something worth exploring when the time is right." The smile that transformed his face made her heart skip. He covered her hand with his own, the touch warm and reassuring. "I can be a patient man, Cassidy James. Especially for something worth waiting for." The weeks that followed brought dramatic changes to Vaughn Valley. With William Tanner facing trial and likely imprisonment for his crimes, Cassidy was finally free from fear. The schoolhouse construction progressed rapidly, with every able-bodied person on the ranch contributing labor or materials. By mid-August, the simple but sturdy building was complete, furnished with desks crafted by the ranch carpenter and books ordered from Denver. On the first day of school, 15 excited children filed into the new building, their faces shining with anticipation. Cassidy stood at the door greeting each one by name, her heart full as she realized she had found not just safety here, but purpose and community. From the corner of her eye, she saw Dawson watching from a distance, giving her this moment without intrusion. When the last child had entered, she looked his way and smiled, receiving a nod of approval and something more pride, and that growing affection they had both acknowledged but not yet fully explored. The autumn days settled into a pleasant routine. Cassidy taught during the week, while evenings and weekends were often spent in Dawson's company. They rode the boundaries of the ranch together, picnicked by the stream where wildflowers still bloomed, and sat on the porch talking late into the night. She learned about cattle ranching and the challenges of building a life in the West, while he discovered her passion for literature and her dreams of someday writing stories of her own. It was on a crisp October evening, with the aspen trees glowing gold in the sunset, that Dawson asked Cassidy to accompany him on a ride to a special place on the ranch. They traveled up into the foothills, following a narrow trail until they reached a small plateau overlooking the entire valley. "This is beautiful," Cassidy breathed, taking in the panoramic view of Vaughn Valley spread below them, the ranch buildings tiny in the distance, the river winding silver through the grasslands. "This is where I came when I first bought the land," Dawson said, helping her dismount. "I stood here and imagined what it could become with hard work and determination." They sat on a fallen log, shoulder to shoulder, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. "Cassidy," Dawson began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. Having you here, seeing you with the children, talking with you each evening, it's shown me what I've been missing all these years." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I know we agreed to wait, to give you time to be sure of your feelings. But my heart is already certain. I love you, Cassidy James. I think I've loved you since that first moment at the auction house, when you stood so brave and proud despite everything that had happened to you." Cassidy felt tears spring to her eyes, not of sorrow but of joy. "Dawson, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know where my heart stands. When you're ready, if you ever feel the same." "I already do," she interrupted, squeezing his hands. "I love you too. I've been falling in love with you day by day, watching how you care for this land and the people who depend on you, seeing your kindness, your integrity, your strength." The smile that lit his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand, but when Cassidy responded with equal fervor, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing fulfilled and promises for the future. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Dawson rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find this again. Never thought I'd want to." "Nor I," Cassidy admitted. "In Boston, I was content with my books and my teaching, but now I can't imagine a life without you in it." He drew back slightly, reaching into his vest pocket. "I have something for you, something I've been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He opened his hand to reveal a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the last light of sunset. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She gave it to me before she died, said I should save it for the woman who would bring light back into my life." His blue eyes held hers intently. "Will you marry me, Cassidy? Make this ranch your home, not just as our teacher, but as my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, with all my heart." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Cassidy knew with absolute certainty that her journey west had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Not to Denver as she had planned, but to this valley, this man, this life that had begun in the most unlikely circumstances on an auction block in Redemption Creek. Their wedding took place on a clear November day, with the aspen trees bare but the pines still green against the first dusting of snow on the distant mountains. The entire ranch community gathered in the newly built schoolhouse, which had been decorated with pine boughs and the last of Mrs. Cooper's dried flowers. Daniel stood as his brother's best man, while Emma Rodriguez, Cassidy's most enthusiastic student, served as maid of honor, beaming with pride in her new dress. The territorial judge who had helped clear Dawson's name performed the ceremony, his official dignity softened by genuine pleasure at uniting the couple whose story had become something of a legend in the region. "I, Dawson, take you, Cassidy, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Dawson's deep voice carried clearly through the hushed schoolroom. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." As Cassidy repeated her vows, she looked into the face of the man who had risked everything to save her, who had given her not just freedom but a home and a future filled with purpose and love. Her voice was steady, her heart certain. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Dawson kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic ranchers present. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire valley for days. Later, as they stood on the porch of the main house, their house now watching the stars come out over their land, Dawson wrapped his arms around Cassidy from behind, pulling her close against his chest. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning back into his embrace. "When I was on that auction block, I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was just beginning. For both of us," he agreed. "You know, I spent everything I had to buy you that day." "And now?" she asked, turning in his arms to face him. Dawson smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face into something heart-stoppingly handsome. "Now I have everything I ever wanted, right here in my arms." As the years passed, Vaughn Valley flourished under their joint stewardship. The ranch expanded, the herd grew, and the school became known throughout the territory for its excellence. Children from neighboring ranches began attending, some riding miles each day for the opportunity to learn from Mrs. Vaughn. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Cassidy gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Dawson's mother. 2 years later, a son joined the family, strong and healthy with his father's blue eyes. The children grew up surrounded by love, learning both the practical skills needed for ranch life and the knowledge found in books that Cassidy insisted were just as important. The schoolhouse that had begun as a simple building became the heart of the community, hosting not just classes but social gatherings, religious services, and even theatrical performances organized by Cassidy. Under her guidance, several of her original students went on to higher education in Denver and beyond, carrying the values they had learned at Vaughn Valley into the wider world. William Tanner was convicted of kidnapping and other crimes, serving 10 years in the territorial prison before disappearing east, a broken man with his reputation and fortune destroyed. The auction house in Redemption Creek was closed down, and the town slowly transformed into a respectable community as new settlers arrived and old ways were abandoned. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Dawson surprised Cassidy with a special gift, a small printing press, and all the materials needed to publish the stories she had been writing in her spare time. Tales of courage and resilience in the West, many inspired by the lives of the people she had come to know and love at Vaughn Valley. "You've given so much to others," he told her as she stood speechless before the press set up in a corner of their expanded home. "Your stories deserve to be shared beyond our valley." Her first collection of tales, published under the title Redemption, Stories from the Western Frontier, found an enthusiastic audience among readers hungry for authentic accounts of life in the West, particularly those featuring strong women characters. The success led to more books, and eventually to speaking engagements in Denver and other cities, though Cassidy always returned eagerly to the ranch she called home. On a summer evening 20 years after that fateful day at the auction house, Dawson and Cassidy sat on the porch of their home, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Their daughter Elizabeth, now married to a neighboring rancher, had 2 children of her own, while their son James was studying law in Denver, following in his uncle Daniel's footsteps. "Did you ever imagine this?" Cassidy asked, her hand finding Dawson's as it had countless times over the years. Her auburn hair now held streaks of silver, but her green eyes were as bright and keen as ever. "Not in my wildest dreams," he admitted, his face weathered by years under the western sun but still handsome, still capable of making her heart quicken with a single glance. "I thought I'd live out my days alone on this ranch, with nothing but cattle and horses for company. And I thought I'd spend my life teaching other people's children, never having any of my own." She smiled as their youngest grandchild, 3-year-old Sarah, chased a butterfly across the grass. "Life has a way of surprising us. Best surprise of my life was walking into that auction house and seeing you," Dawson said softly, bringing her hand to his lips. "Even if it did cost me every penny I had at the time. Best investment you ever made," Cassidy teased, leaning against his shoulder. "Without question," he agreed solemnly. "I paid for a woman at an auction, but what I got was the other half of my soul." As the sun set over Vaughn Valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Cassidy reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the terror and despair of captivity, the astonishing rescue by a stranger who spent everything he had to save her, and the love that had grown between them, sustaining them through good times and bad, building a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. "She's mine," Dawson had declared that day in Redemption Creek. But the truth, Cassidy knew, was something far more beautiful and profound. They belonged to each other, partners in every sense, their lives intertwined like the roots of the ancient pines that stood sentinel over their land. And in that belonging, they had both found the greatest freedom of all, the freedom to love and be loved, completely and without reservation, for all the days of their lives.